Good afternoon. Afternoon in DC, New York, in the US. Good evening in Barcelona, in Argelès, in Paris, and in Europe. My name is Isidre Sala. I am the head of the delegation of the Catalan government in the US, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on this very special event today, online event, Josep Bartolí's imprint, Catalan Exile in the center of New York avant-garde scene. This event is co-organized in partnership with Institut Ramon Llull, the institution that promotes Catalan culture and language abroad, French Institute Alliance Française in New York, organizers of the Animation First Festival, the Catalan audiovisual firm Imagic TV, and ALBA, the Abraham Lincoln Brigades Archives, an American organization that promotes social activism and the defense of human rights. This event is very timely. Since last February the 5th, last week, was in Catalonia the National Day of Exile and Deportation, in commemoration of the thousands of people that had to flee exile after the Spanish Civil War. Among them, it was Josep Bartolí, the person we remember today, in the occasion of the presentation of the animation film Josep in the Animation First Festival in New York this week. Josep Bartolí is one of these characters. The more you discover about his life, the more surprised you are. Definitively, he deserves much more attention because his life was truly amazing. Talking about Josep's Bartolí life is talking about democracy. Josep had to flee exile after the Spanish Civil War because of his commitment with a democratic republic and his rejection of a fascist regime. Is talking about refugee crisis. Most parts of the film takes place in a refugee camp in the south of France, where thousands of Catalan and Spanish refugees spend a hard time. It's talking about art. Josep drew everywhere, in the refugee camps, in the ships, in the countries he visited, and he became very close to the most renowned artists of the moment in both Mexico and New York. But also talk about love, activism, commitment, etc. So as you see, all these concepts remains breaking news today. So to delve into the life of Josep in the sense of these concepts, today we have invited three great experts to share with us, who are going to share with us their insider's knowledge. Let me remind the audience that you can participate posing questions to the panelists at the YouTube chat, and we'll be happy to distribute among the speakers, and they will be happily to reply them. But before diving into, I'm pleased to give the floor to Madame Catherine Lamarès and Delphine Selles Alvarez, co-curators Animation Film Festival, who will introduce us this very recommendable festival that takes place these days in New York. Delphine, Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Delphine, one of the co-curators of the festival with Catherine. Thank you so much, Isidre, and everyone at the delegation for having us. I'll be very quick because I think it's more important that we speak about Josep. But we're thrilled to show the film at the festival. It's a French animation festival. It's only 4 years old, and we have a lot of film premieres and classics this year. It's all online, available across the nation. So I hope you will join us. All the film will be shown through February 15. And Josep is really one of the most important films in the program. Not only it's beautiful, but as you said, it's also very timely. So thank you so much for having us. I hope you can join us to watch Josep before it goes away on February 15, and you can join us for other films as well. Thank you. And Catherine, I think you have some personal words about the film that you wanted to share.
Thank you, Delphine. Yes, I would start saying, bon dia a tots i merci per estar con nosaltres avui. Well, I hope you got it. It's a great pleasure for me. You did? Great.
Of course.
I'm Catherine Lamarès, co-curator with Delphine, and she explained what we have been doing. But today I would like to share a memory. And I remember when I was 8, we went on vacation with my parents in Font-Romeu in Cerdagne. And I loved learning a few words in Catalan. That's some memory that I got. And it was so easy. I mean, when you're 8 years old, it's so easy. And to dance La Sardagne, indeed. As a child, I was surprised and touched. It was so close to France and yet another country. So today, I'd like to tell you why I was so touched by the film Joseph by Aurel. And maybe it has a little bit to do with these memories from my childhood. When Jean-Paul Commun told me some time ago that he was producing an animation film about what happened in 1939 in this part of the world, I was immediately attracted by the subject and sort of compelled to ask the right for the film to show it in New York for the festival. So I knew the place, I knew these beautiful mountains, but not the history that happened there. How come that these terrible events slipped through the cracks of history? I mean, that was my questioning. And our history books, how could have we turned our eyes away? There was something to repair, something to do about that. And then here comes Aurel with wonderful pencil strokes, who resurrected the story with Joseph Bartholdy's journey, because it's really a journey. It's a testimony of a cartoonist from a cartoonist, filled with rage and courage and adventure, indeed, from Spain to France to Mexico to New York, indeed. You have it all. So here we are now. Thank you, Aurel. Thank you, Jean-Paul. And thank you, the government in Catalonia, for inviting us.
Thanks very much to you, Katharina and Delphine. So now, before we start the debate, we are going to watch a short trailer of the film so you can realize of the beauty of this piece of art, authentic piece of art. So.
Ça te dit quelque chose? 500 000 réfugiés cherchent un abri en France. Tu crois qu'ils méritaient ça? Les fils de fer barbelés dressés pour laisser mourir de faim, de froid, de maladie, frappés, humiliés. Régalez-vous! Alors, il y avait bien quelques gestes. Tenez, c'est pour vous.
Sembla que estiguis esperant algú amb moltes ganes.
Sí, la meva promesa.
Allez, bougez-vous les fesses! No passa res! Tiens, saloperie d'espagnol de merde! Tiens!
Et après?
Hola, Josep.
Yo daría para escupir en la tumba de Franco.
Oh, as you saw, excellent. Every time we see this trailer, it's like something really, really special. So we recommend everyone to watch this film. As Catherine and Delphine explained you, it's available during these days in the festival, the 15th of February. So take your choice. So now it's my pleasure to introduce you Georges Bartholdy, photojournalist and Josep Bartholdy's nephew, a person who can better present us a more personal perspective of his uncle, Josep. George, it's a great pleasure. Welcome you today here.
Thank you very much. Moltes gràcies.
And de res, benvingut. So what can explain you us about your uncle, about his experience?
Okay, first I should like to apologize for my very bad English. I learned in school a long time ago, and I spoke very little in my life. So I hope you will understand me.
Perfectly.
I didn't, when Aurel came to visit me 11 years ago to talk me about his project to do a film about a movie about the life of my uncle José Bertolini. It was just several weeks after I published a book named La Retirada, was not exactly a book about Bartoli's life. It was a book about how the son and daughters of exiled people of 49, how we had to build in France country. It was not our country, evidently. We have to live with this very heavy memory of the defeat of the Spanish Republic in 39. We are daughter and son of people who fight for democracy, who win election, and who were defeated by a fascist power, with sustained by Hitler and Mussolini. So, and the story of our parents was disappeared from the official history because some months after the Retirada and the defeat of the Republic, the Second World War was ajuda-me, subam purtator. So it was a very small story in the big and awful story of the Second World War. So we are also the daughters and the son of the silence, of the humiliation our parents had to suffer when they came in France, when they were in concentration camps, and it's a memory was very silencious for a long time. Time maybe people would know this period died finally. So I'm 64 years old, and I'm one of the youngest sons of the exiliated, and I'm lucky from one thing is to get the drawings of my uncle, who, as everybody knows now, but didn't know until the movie, was one of the main drawers of the Spanish Republic and of the Catalan government in the Spanish Republic. My uncle let us a lot of drawings were really, from my point of view, the best illustration what they had to suffer in the French concentration camps. When he went to Mexico in 1940, he published a book whose name is Campos de Concentración, 1939. Some points, and it was the first really illustration of what happened in France in this winter 49. These drawings are now belonging to the Archivo Municipal de Barcelona, the archival of the city of Barcelona, and everybody can look at them on the website of the Archivo of Barcelona. But a long time, during very years, they didn't be known by nobody in Europe. In Europe, especially in France, and also in Catalonia and also in Spain. So it's I'm very proud to contribute to show them, and the movie of Orwell is an only a story for us, because it gives to the drawings of Bartoli's visibility wonderful, but more than that, it's a focus on what happened in France in 1939 and what happened in Spain, of course, of course, 3 years before, but what happened in France in 1939, and how the European democracies turn eyes not to see what happened in France and what they, comment se dit,
It was a treason.
A treason of the Spanish Republic. Was one model in this eyes. It was the French Republic. It was for the Spanish Republicans. The French Republic was the absolute model of society, and this model of society we traduce Vandrei as, and two times the tradition is on two times, because first called non-intervention, no intervention, was one crime, and the second crime was how they receive our parents in this period, in this country. And now their daughter and their son, we have a memory obligation, because evidently they died for a long time ago, and we are now we have a deposit of this memory. And I should like to give a lot of thanks to Orwell, because what he did to make this period is absolutely fantastic.
Great. Thank you very much, George, for this testimonial. Really, really, really interesting, and explain us about this double treason, double betrayal that it happened. Yes, luckily, it's better late than never, no? So we can a little bit talk about this things that happened not so long ago, and hopefully we can contribute so they never repeat again. So now it's my pleasure to introduce next speaker today, next panelist, Mr. Sebastian Faber. Sebastian is a professor of Hispanic Studies at Oberlin College. He's a writer of a long list of books about the Spanish Civil War and the exile, and he has served as the chair of the Board of Governors of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives, ALBA, being also the co-editor of ALBA quarterly magazine, The Volunteer, where he actually interviewed some months ago George Bartoli, who regularly contributes to Spanish and US media. So Sebastian, what do you think? Do you think that we still have some pending lessons learned from Josep's time?
Absolutely. Thank you, Isidra. It's great to be here, and it was wonderful to be able to see the terrific film by Orwell, and it was really great sometime last year to interview Georges. And it's great to join him now in this wonderful event. Thank you for organizing it, and thank you to the film festival organizers for putting this together. I have, I think, 9 minutes to say a little bit, or 10 minutes. I want to make 3 main points. I want to address 3 main things. First, I want to talk a little bit more about the political context of Spanish Civil War exile. Then I want to talk a little bit about the culture of Spanish Civil War exile in terms of continuities and breaks. And finally, I want to talk a little bit more specifically about U.S. Civil War, Spanish Civil War exile in the United States, of which Josep Bartoli was an important part. So that first part, Georges just talked about a double crime. I would, speaking about Spanish Civil War exile, I would talk about a triple betrayal. In reality, the experience of the couple hundred thousands of Spaniards who were forced into exile after the Civil War was marked by three very distinct moments of betrayal of Spain by the international community, especially by the democratic West. Those three moments were, first, July 36, when the democratically elected government is attacked by its own military, and the democratic West does not stand by its fellow democracy, but instead opts for non-intervention. The second moment of betrayal was in 1939, as Georges describes, and as the movie beautifully depicts, when 500,000 Spaniards enter France. They are treated like criminals. They are put into concentration camps, right? And they're really set up as lambs to slaughter for later when the Germans invade France to be deported to Nazi concentration camps. The third moment of betrayal is 1945, right? When the Allied forces managed to defeat the Axis, defeat Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Japan. They leave Franco in place, the Franco dictatorship, even though it was established, as everybody knew by then, with the help of Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. So those three moments of betrayal really mark the experience of Josep Bartoli and the other hundreds of thousands of Spanish exiles. It's true that in 1945, Franco's left in place, but Franco Spain is treated like a pariah internationally. It's not allowed to enter the United Nations. However, 8 years later, in 1953, the United States is quick to broker a treaty with Franco Spain. And then 2 years after that, in 1955, Franco Spain is admitted to the United Nations, kind of sealing that final moment of betrayal. And exiles like Josep Bartoli, who by then had been in exile for close to 15 years, felt that as really as a personal form of betrayal by the United States. The second point I want to talk about is a little bit the culture of Spanish Civil War exile in terms of continuities and breaks. So on the one hand, when Franco wins the war, hundreds of thousands of Spaniards go into exile, among them really the leaders of Spanish culture, academics, painters, writers, poets, playwrights, artists of all kinds are among those who leave Spain, and they end up in France, about 20, 30,000 in Mexico, many elsewhere in Latin America, a bunch in England, a bunch in Northern Europe, a bunch in the Soviet Union. And their leaving their homeland signals a radical break with Spain and with Catalonia and the Basque Country and Galicia. In the sense that their work from that moment on no longer can enter Spain, can no longer communicate with the Spanish public. And that break is really painful for these artists and writers, and painful naturally for Spain itself, which no longer has access to a generation of artists, as we should not forget this, had in the 20s and 30s reached the very top of cultural flourishing, right? The 20s and 30s in Spain are the silver age. There are this moment of immense cultural activity in terms of music and painting and literature and all kinds of other forms of intellectual expression. So that's a break. On the other hand, though, the Spanish culture in Spain and Catalonia in the 20s and 30s had also been incredibly cosmopolitan, had been deeply connected to Northern Europe, to Paris specifically, of course, but to London as well, to Latin America in all kinds of ways, and to the United States. So for the exiles who ended up in those other regions, being in those regions and inserting themselves into the local cultures was in a way a continuity of the context they had already made in the 20s and 30s. In the same way that the 3 years of the Spanish Civil War had been the height of that kind of cultural activity between 36 and 39, after all kinds of artists, writers, intellectuals rally around the Republican cause and sometimes even come to Spain. So the contacts made, the friendships made, the artistic collaborations engaged in that whole period of 20s and 30s, especially the 3 years of the Civil War, can be continued in exile. And that's what you see in Mexico City, in New York City, in Paris, in London, in Buenos Aires, in Santiago de Chile, etc., etc. The third point I want to make is about Spanish war exile in the United States. Mexico is really the country that receives most exiles because it has a really generous immigration policy when it comes to political refugees. And Lázaro Cárdenas, the president of Mexico, very early on decides to open up his country's borders to pretty much any Spanish refugee who wants to come to Mexico. The United States is a different story. The United States is very restrictive in its immigration policy, and it's very tough for anybody, especially with any kind of radical or left-wing political profile, to be allowed into the United States. So therefore, the number of Spanish exiles who make it in the US is much smaller than who end up in Mexico or other countries. That said, a bunch of them do, and they end up, for example, occupying often important positions at US universities. At Princeton, Américo Castro and Vicente Llorens, right, for example. Ramón Sender, the novelist, ends up teaching first at the University of Mexico and then at UCLA. There's a bunch of them at the University of Chicago. They end up all over the United States. But New York City becomes naturally a nucleus of intellectual activity as well. And that's where Josep Bartolí ends up. That's where Victoria Kent is the intellectual and politician from Spain, who from New York City founds and manages for decades an important magazine, right? And what you can see with looking at Josep Bartolí's trajectory that Pilar will talk about in a second, is that with that kind of cosmopolitan intellectual baggage that he brings with from his experience in the 20s and 30s in Spain and experience during the Civil War, he has no trouble in Mexico connecting with the environment of Diego Rivera, Frida Kahlo, and the whole flourishing intellectual artistic community of Mexico City, in the same way that once he's in New York City, he inserts himself directly into the New York avant-garde, right? And within no time, really, he ends up becoming an illustrator for the Saturday Evening Post and other important magazines. So Josep Bartolí illustrates in many ways the height to which Catalan and Spanish culture had come in the 20s and 30s, and the way in which exile allowed them to continue that despite that triple betrayal. In the United States, Spanish war exiles did not have it easy because in the Cold War, anti-communism was powerful here. Josep ended up blacklisted. He was part of the Hollywood blacklist. He worked for Hollywood. He was put on the blacklist, as were many left-wing American scriptwriters and actors and directors, as we know. So there was, for certain, friction with the US authorities. At the same time, that we should also not forget that among the artistic community, the intellectual community population, there was also a strong current of sympathy for the Spanish Republic. Thousands and thousands of Americans had rallied for the Spanish Republican cause between 1936 and 39. Thousands had continued to support that cause through World War II, giving money to help Spanish refugees in the camps in France, supporting all kinds of actions against Franco for the Spanish Republic. So exiles like Josep Bartolí could also tap into that current of solidarity and sympathy with the Spanish Republic that had really been shaped in those 3 experiences, 3 years of the Spanish Civil War, during which, as well as we know, close to 3,000 Americans from all walks of life decided to put their lives on the line and fight fascism in Spain, and about 800 of them died in Spain as part of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. I leave it here and I'll hand it over back to Isidro.
Thank you, Sebastian. And definitely, you touch a couple of angles very interesting and complementary in this debate for sure. The experience of the Catalan exiles in Mexico, in the US, is something that we have a lot to discuss about it, sure. And also this current of solidarity from the US people, despite this kind of blacklisting from maybe the American authorities for the reason of the political perspective. So these 2 areas are areas that probably we will be able to debate in the coming future. So now we pass the floor on our third panelist today. Third panelist is Pilar Parcerisas. Pilar is a Catalan art critic, an independent exhibition curator, a journalist, and a screenwriter. She has curated very important exhibitions in Catalonia. She's been very prolific publicating about art. Among her works, the book Josep Bartolí, Un creador exili, Josep Bartolí, Creator in Exile. Pilar, thanks for accepting our invitation. And hopefully you can explain us a little bit about the New York period of Josep Bartolí without introducing here a new betrayal. We have already, George talked about two betrayals, Sebastian talked about a third one. Hopefully you're not explaining about a fourth one. So, Pilar, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this meeting. I think it's important to talk about the drawings and painting in Bartolí. It's not the same. Yeah? Bartolí belongs to a family of artists involved in music, theater, scenography. And first of all, it is necessary to make a difference between drawing and painting in Bartolí's work. Because the drawing is a way of expression and a way of life. It is part of the school of reality. He didn't practice academic drawing, and the harsh reality of the streets of Barcelona, circus, music hall, full bites, boxing, were the example. And he connects to the criticism of Otto Dix or George Grosz in Germany, for instance. He has this point of denunciation. He needs to transmit a message. His drawing is always a comment, an opinion, a denunciation, an instrument to emphasize reality. Himself, Bartolí said, "I need the drawing to be like a bobbin lace through which something else goes. My drawings are always caricatures. You have to see something behind them." Then in the beginning, he's not interested in painting, live from day to day of the graphic press. He uses the pen both to draw and to write. Bartolí writes with drawing. Bartolí is critical, sharp, able to draw with wall situations and critical comments about the attitudes of a miserable spirit. Then he arrives in Mexico in 1942. He rebuilds some of the drawings from the camps that are now in Barcelona, in the Barcelona archives. And Molins y Fàbregas published this magnificent book, The Concentration Camps, in 1944. And 1 year later, in December 1945, after a party with his friends, Molins y Fàbregas and Adroer, that they belonged to the Old Poem Party, leaves from New York. Then in 1946, he presents drawings and gouaches at the British Art Center in New York, and they are urban. It opens up a whole new world in New York. Then the possibility to publish in the Holiday magazine, a kind of Harper's Bazaar, the magazine was a platform for him to go not only to draw about New York, Chicago, New Orleans, Mexico, Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro. It was an open world to collaborate in this magazine, and his drawings were compared to the Steinberg, Saul Steinberg drawings. Then we have to say that the Bartolí the painter Bartolí is forced in exile. At the turn of the 50s, he managed to create a personal pictorial work. He makes a synthesis between the best arabesques of his drawing and abstract expressionist painting, diluting one of the strongest debates of the 20th century, that is, figuration and abstraction. The artistic triangle of his work was Mexico, Paris, and New York. Mexico, of course, is the point of personal affirmation, a background of indigenism and almost inevitable archaeology, where he's fully recognized as an artist. Is there where he marries Michelle Stewart in 1953. She was an assistant of Diego Rivera in the mural of Theater of the Insurgents, and they are going to Paris for 3 years. Then Paris was the first step for the Bartoli's painting. That is, in Paris, he takes the classical Cézanne spirit and the post-Cubism of the Paris school, that is post-Picassian style, so-called Paris school. And in the meantime, of course, he follows working for magazines, critical magazines like Iberian Magazine, a critical platform against the situation of the Spanish dictatorial regime. He returns to New York in 1956. And then he applies for visas and so on. He works for several agencies for advertising. But what is good for him at that moment is to live around 10th Street. He lives near the Abstract Expressionism and School of New York. And New York allows him to be a frontline spectator at this New York school. Then he frequents the Cedar Bar, where he meets de Kooning, Pollock, Franz Kline, Philip Guston, among others. And he especially admires Franz Kline. Then he routes the painting towards the abstraction. And in 1973, some years later, when de Kooning is a member of a jury in the Mark Rothko Foundation, they gave the prize to him. Then this same year, in 1958, that is this turning point in his painting, he met Bernice Bromberg, his late wife, still alive, and I met her in the past in New York preparing this exhibition and book. And New York facilitates the vision of a Motley international stage of pop and mass culture, which allows him to cry out against injustice and continue to practice his scathing criticism of society and its leaders. He had done so in his early days with the cartoon politics and continues to do so with painting from the second half of the 60s. And the most relevant exhibitions in this abstract expressionism were in the Roland's Early Gallery in New York during 3 years, 60, 61, and 62. And when I went to New York for my research about Bartoli, I met Dora Ashton, an art historian and an art critic who wrote about Bartoli. And one of these critics published in the newspapers says Joseph Bartoli's washes and small oils in the Roland Early Gallery are mostly abstract, often with delicate colors, moss, green, mauve, pink, and yellow, and of a classical cubist conception. At times, the surface of some smaller washes is covered with a light layer that makes the square shapes look special. It's amazing because Bartoli has some writings about this moment of his painting. And he says, my paintings are not abstract. It can be said that they are essays to fuse the graphics of the drawing with the color of the painting. I start from what is concrete, which is drawing, towards the abstract, based on color. I have taken a small step towards abstractionism, but I want to get there with a logical creative basis and call them neither painting nor decorative art. He obtains the nationality in '62. She divorced of Michelle Stewart, that I met her in New York too, very, very nice woman. And it's amazing because even though he was an artist critic and with this message of denunciation, he was not in the list of dissident artists in McCarthy's time. He has another period into the painting in New York, in the paintings in New York, that we can say that is a critical expressionism between 65 and 66. He paints portraits of German family, the Condottieri. They are kind of caricatures of the power and fascism. And he has another last period that I say could be influenced by the mass culture between 69 and 76. And it's the time that he receives an influence for the cinema. And he says, for me, more than Catalan old comics, aucas, diríem en català, cinema is what gave me the idea to develop social criticism transplanted to the plastic arts without falling into socialist realism. I have always wanted to create a kind of social critic alongside journalistic or literary criticism, talking about man's problems without addressing an elite. Well, the last time he created these pockets murals, that is a kind of mosaics with several portraits and subjects, non-conformist portraits. He was influenced by the movements in the US as hippism, women's liberation, Vietnam War, a struggle for democracy, and he wants to not to kill, but we can say he paints people who must die, that is, bad people.
Yeah, I think it's clear that we can talk about hours about this Giuseppe Impina, and you know very well. That's great. I suggest that maybe now we also welcome to the main scene George and Sebastian. Maybe you can also have some kind of dialogue among you, because we touched 3 different perspectives about the topics of today's discussion, and definitely complementary. So one thing that, for example, always find it really interesting is that we mentioned that some of these concepts today still exist, unfortunately. So we are still talking about refugees, about exile, etc., problems with democracy. But of course, at the time, 80 years ago, the situation was very different. Probably you, George, couldn't send messages to your uncle, immediate messages, to ask him, well, how are you? Is everything right? Whatever. So at the time, I understand that people only communicate doing letters, sending letters that took probably weeks to arrive to the destinatory, and it was very difficult to stay in touch, at the time. So something that is today is absolutely easy, So maybe what could be one of the areas in which you could maybe, George, explain us how was the relationship with the exiles, or between the exiles, because actually you were exiled as well, or your parents were exiled, but not so far away from Catalonia. But in the case of Josep, you had a family very far away,
Yes, my uncle all his life had a strong. He was a painter and a drawer, but he was also a writer, and a very good writer, as well as in politics matters, also in familiar matters. My father, his brother, was also a Catalanist activist in exile, and as I was a child, I very often hear to the communications they had. They are polemic. They were not. They are not okay about all the matters in politics. My father was a nationalist, national Catalan nationalist. My uncle was more universalist. He was he was a member of the movement for the United Socialist United European United for excuse me for the États-Unis Socialistes d'Europe, Socialist United States of Europe, and he was very activist in this matter. But they during all their life, they stood very, very close to each other. I met my uncle for the first time. I was 40 years old. I was a child, and he came for the first time at home in Perpignan, where we live with his parents, with Bernice Bromberg, who was his wife. They are not married, but she was his wife, and I met them for the first time. He spent some days with us, and we talked a lot. I was very young, but I was a young photographer. So we had a lot of things to discuss. And they came back in Perpignan. I was 80 years old, and I was student, but a very bad and very occasional student, and I was mainly activist and photographer, very young and photographer. And what I remind of the 2 years we share his studio, his drawing studio, and my laboratory, photographic laboratory or studio, and at the same time we share the same place during 2 years. And what I remind of him is the hard discussions we had about the communism, about the civil war, about the activism, and it was a moment of my life where I had to choose between activism and professionalism, photography, and I think if I became a reporter, a photography reporter, it's after I've spent so much time with my uncle, exchanging about political, of course, but about a lot of things. Is what I remember from him is this obsession to not to shut up, never shut up. Don't listen to the party, to the church, evidently to the government. Just listen to yourself and do what you feel good to do. It's basically, I don't know if I answered the question, but it's what I should like about his wonderful personality with an humor, fantastical, with it's what I remember for him.
Yeah, great. Definitely, he had a strong influence in your future. That's fantastic. So we have several questions from the audience, from all the speakers. I will try to maybe gather them. Maybe this for Sebastian. You know how many Spanish civil wars end up in the U.S. And another question related, that is, if you can tell us a little bit more about the Spanish and Catalan exile community in New York.
The number of Spanish war exiles in the U.S., I don't think there's any researcher has established that definitively. I would say in the hundreds or thousands, but not more. So Mexico is one of the top destinations, received about 20,000. I think Argentina about 10,000. In the US, the people that ended up here are often well known because they became university professors: Francisco Ayala, Vicente Llorens, Américo Castro, Ramón Sender. But in sheer numbers, there are not as many at all. I see there's a question about the Spanish and Catalan exile community in the US and to what extent Bartolí was in contact with other Catalanes, like Isuñé. I'm not sure, but talking with George, and maybe George can say something about this too. My impression is that Josep spends time in Mexico. In Mexico, famously, the exile community was very closed in on itself, despite the fact that they were Spanish-speaking and Mexico was Spanish-speaking. They were seen as very self-containing and fairly prey to nostalgia and to an obsession with Spain. My understanding is that when Josep, already in Mexico, hangs out more with Mexicans than with fellow Spaniards, and once he makes it to the US, he kind of makes a conscious break with that, the mode of nostalgia, the mode of being stuck in the past. And I think even his decision to embrace color and oil paint as a mode of expression signals a kind of a break with his own past and with Spanish or Catalan exile communities. So my own impression is that he was kind of reluctant to engage too much with his fellow exiles and was more interested in reaching out to the American or the other people in New York City. So George, is that right? Is that what or Pilar, is that right? That he was not somebody to take refuge in the exile community, rather somebody who says like, well, let the Spaniards be the Spaniards, I'm ready to move on.
No, I think that in New York he discovered a new world, and then but the context, New York, Mexico, were set up before because Pollock and Orozco, Siqueiros, well, there were many contacts in the 20s and 30s. And he follows these contacts between Mexico and New York during decades. But the most part of the refugees from here, from Catalonia, were in Mexico. The families are still there, part of them. But I think that for him, New York was not only New York, was the world, was the world, the possibility of travel, the possibility to draw the world. Well, I met him in the 80s in Barcelona when he exhibited, and I have just an impression of someone that who was a very good observer of the reality, a reader of everything he saw, but humble, someone very discreet at the same time, very discreet, humble, precise, realistic, not someone who speaks for speaking, no. He was very, very, very concrete in words, in attitude, and very open at the same time. And he was probably in his late 70s, and well, he looked like a young man because of the hair, because of the attitude. He was not an old man in the 80s, I remember. Well, this is my impression. And he was involved in the socialist. That's true. And he was an Europeist. He believed on the European as a country, as a federal country. Well, he was very close to the socialists. That's true. That's true. Like George said.
Great. And you, George, remember that he was in talk with Isuñé, for example, when he was in the US?
No, I don't know.
I don't know. Okay.
I said Pilar, he was very discreet about his life. When he was in his family with us, he was an example which is very interesting. He never told us, except the woman of my mother, my sister, my cousin. He never talked to the men of his relation with Frida Kahlo. It could be possible anybody had a relation with Frida Kahlo, is proud of that, and says, yes, I was a boyfriend of Frida Kahlo. Never. Only the woman because he had a special relation with a woman of the families. Especially with my mom, my cousin also, is very intimate relation with her because he was very close to the woman in general, and just about his sentimental matters, he just only spoke, and very few, with the woman, never with my father, his other brothers, or me, it was very, I don't, inclús en català, molt modest i molt discret, molt
discreet, yeah.
Yeah.
I think Pilar already said before he was humble and discreet. Yeah, so that's clear. So there's a couple of questions probably for you, George, as well. For example, Marianne is asking from New York if you still have photographs of when you met your uncle when you were 14 years old of that time.
Yes, but very bad photographs, because in this epoch I was a very bad photographer, very young and very bad photographer. But yeah, I have some pictures with him. One of the last I have with him is on the beach of the Saint-Cyprien, where my father was detained in a concentration camp. We, my son with my camera took a picture of Joseph and me, which is a very nice picture. People who want to see it, it's on my Facebook page, and I'm searching for all the negatives, but it was a very bad photograph. So I have some pictures, yes, and I always took pictures of him since I was 14, but with few pictures, but later, yes. And the last picture I took of him was 2 weeks before he died in 1895 in New York, where we with our cousins, we did the journey to despedirse, to say goodbye to him, because we know we were sure he was dying. And the last picture I took of him was 2 weeks before he died.
Great, keep them. It's very sure that great testimonial. So we have a question from anyone can just drop in, from Jordana Mendelssohn. She's asking if you can talk more about the heterogeneity between generations in the movie. I understand that you also have seen the movie. And about the artist's testimony. So feel free.
I mean, one of the things I loved about the film, and I'm interested to hear Georges' view on this as in part a Frenchman. I love the way in which the story was framed as the conversation between a grandfather and his grandson, and where the parents' generation is uninterested. They're like, these ugly pictures, story, we're not interested, right? So this we tend to associate the oblivion, the forgetfulness, the pact of forgetting with Spain, but in France as well, right? That whole episode, the kind of shameful episode of the reception of the Spaniards, has been kind of silenced, right? So the discovery by the grandson of this story, I think, is really poignant in the film. At the same time, that clearly as Jordana says, the pictures themselves become a vehicle for testimony, right? So even the way that Aurel has inspire the entire film on Batory's art. I think is very, very telling. So I'm curious to hear from you, Georges. How you see that frame, the frame for the story? But it's the 16-year-old or so grandson who discovers and is genuinely interested in the story and actually is able to morally connect with it, right? To sort of live along with his grandfather, whereas his parents' generation is not interested. Is that reflective of the situation today, you would say?
I'm sorry, but I didn't understand all the question. Algú pot traduir, Isidre o Pilar?
Sí, bàsicament, si creus que a la pel·lícula es veu el net del guardià del camp de concentració, s'interessa molt, no?, per la història d'ell i del Josep. I és com si hi ha una generació entremig que no està interessada en el que va passar en aquella època i després la que ve darrere es torna a interessar. No? Si també ho has viscut així una mica, la teva experiència.
Ho puc dir en català i m'ho tradueixes?
Sí, cal? Sí.
Perquè ho faré més... Sembla que tots els exils, sigui el nostre, els nostres pares, com els d'avui, ja tenen un punt en comú. En tenen molts, però bàsicament tenen un punt és que no és la primera generació que porta la veu dels exiliats, sinó que és la segona generació, són els nets. És una mica especial perquè jo sóc el fill més jove d'un dels més joves de la retirada, perquè la meva mare només tenia 16 anys quan va passar, però tinc l'edat de ser un net. I els que porten avui la memòria de l'exil republicà a França, bàsicament, els que conec jo, bàsicament són nets, perquè els fills van heredar del silenci dels pares, de l'humiliació dels pares, de l'obligació de silenci. Deixo traduir perquè si no...
Sí, perquè si no sents molt. So George is really confirming this point. So basically, and as George says, this is a common not only in this case, but in different cases of exile. It's normally the second generation, the grandsons that are bringing the testimonial rather than the sons and daughters of the exile, because they still carry some kind of humiliation sense. So it's something that it's really difficult to get rid of it. And probably the next generation is more free in these terms. Please continue, George.
No, bàsicament és això, és vull dir que nosaltres ho vam tenir que callar, perquè només teníem una obligació, és de ser més francesos que els francesos i de no renegar contra aquesta república que ens havia, malgrat tot, acollit, educat, protegit del feixisme. Doncs havíem de ser reconeixents i que no havíem de dir res, havíem de callar. I a més, altra cosa també que és important és que em penso que bàsicament és una mica, que podria ser una visió una mica masclista de les coses, però molt difícil per un pare explicar al seu fill el que ha patit en termes d'humiliació i de brutalitat, quan és un vençut, perquè el que som bàsicament són fills de vençuts. Nosaltres hem perdut una guerra abans de néixer ja, per començar malament. Doncs és més fàcil quan és un oncle, com va ser per mi el Josep, o un avi, encara millor, quan és un avi que ho explica perquè no és el seu fill, no és tan entranyable d'explicar les coses, es pot dir les coses de maneres més freda, més distanciada de la realitat. I el meu pare de la Guerra Civil me'n va parlar molt poc, uns detallets, quan el van ferir, unes coses, quan va passar la frontera, unes cosetes. Dels camps, mai. O sí, el que feia broma, potser, amb una cosa que tenia gràcia, coses així, però el que van passar, i que és el que es veu en els dibuixos, és el que es llegeix en els dibuixos. Aquests dibuixos foten olor de merda de camp, tenen la brutalitat dels gendarmes i tenen la brutalitat dibuixada pel meu oncle del que van viure, que els meus pares, el meu pare, bàsicament, no m'ho va mai explicar així.
So just let me translate. Yeah, it's really interesting, no? That actually you were just telling that you are a special case because you are second generation. You are a son, but since you are the youngest child of a very young person who was exiled, so your mother was 16, no, when she crossed the border. you are about the same age of the third generation, no? The grandsons of the exiles. That's why you are probably more engaged in this memory, no? And it's true. There's something very interesting that you mentioned. It's very difficult for a father to tell your son or your daughter that you lost the war. It's something some sense humiliating, and it's shameful, no? So that's probably why it's easier after the next generation to explain with more distance, and the grandson and the grandchildren can somehow get some distance on some perspective and get more and more interested. Yeah, you mentioned something that your dad explained you a little about what happened during the war and during the sense. It a little bit reminds to me what my parents told me about their parents. So my grandparents told very little to my parents about the war, and this is something I have heard. My generation have heard a lot, no, and probably it's a little bit the same. Something that absorbs this attention. Yeah, sure.
Si em permets, podria afegir alguna cosa to show the original book of Campos de Concentración. After the exhibition of Terrace, who Pilar was talking about, my uncle gave me the last book of Campos de Concentración. It was his book. It was the last he had, and when he offers me the book, he wrote me on this book something. T'ho dic en català, Pilar o Isidre, si ho vols traduir en anglès, que ho faràs més bé que jo. I diu, per en Jordi, aquest document, entre cometes, fotogràfic, que potser un dia contribuirà a trencar l'eficaç conspiració del silenci.
It is difficult to translate.
La missa est.
That's this photographic document that hopefully one day will contribute to break the silence. That's true. This is a story about political silence, sure.
Yeah.
Pilar, want to add something?
Bueno, de fet és després d'una experiència, after an experience like the concentration camps, I think that, and if you are not the vanquisher, if you lose the war, then it is more necessary to live a time of duelo, dol, no sé com es diu, duel, no? És passar el dol.
Deixa'm buscar, perquè no conec. Let me find this word for you. Go ahead.
Duelo. Is to forget, but is
the mourning, the grief, the mourning.
Duelo, grief.
Grief, mourning, yes.
Yes, to pass the time. Yeah.
We have another question from José Muriá. Says that George says about grandchildren does not work in Mexico. Many children have maintained the strength of exile. I don't see a question here, but I understand that it has related with that. Yes, you mentioned a little bit already, George. No, that you continue this story and you recall things that happened a long time ago.
I think to answer this question, I think the main difference between exile in Mexico and in France was Mexico welcomed the refugees. In Mexico, the refugees were heroes, a kind of heroes, because they fight for democracy and for the republic. In France, they were received as criminals, as communists and killers, and so it was a shame to be in France in 1949. It was a shame to be a Republican exiled, and it was a shame after the war. It was a shame for France to have received the Republicans like that, and to have kept, as said Sebastian, to have kept Franco in peace in Spain. So the difference is that in Mexico they are proud to be what they are, and we had shame, we ashamed to be Republican daughters in France. It's a reason for I think it could be a difference. Maybe Sebastian, you.
Yeah, I would add exactly what George says, and I think that extended to, so if you think of a regular French person not associated with Spain, or a regular Mexican person not associated with Spain, in Mexico, the story of Mexico's reception and welcoming of the Spanish refugees was a point of pride that fitted very perfectly in the narrative of national pride of Mexico after World War II. Right? Mexico was the country that stood for progressive values, and that included standing by the Spanish Republic, and that included welcoming Spanish Republican refugees. In France, the post-war narrative of French national pride had no place for Vichy, obviously, right? And had no place for France's reaction during the Civil War or its reception of the refugees. So for a French person trying to be proud of French history, that's a very hard piece to fit into that national narrative. In the same way that in the United States attitude toward the Spanish Republic during the Civil War doesn't fit with the narrative of the greatest generation that beats Hitler, right? It just doesn't make sense narratively speaking. So it's easier to shove it under the carpet, to sweep it under the carpet than to try to tell that story. But right in Mexico, it was easier.
Yeah, sure. Very understandable, I think. That is true. So let me gather the last few questions, and then we can. I'm sure we could talk for ages here, but probably the shorter the better, no? So there's a question from Jordana for Pilar. Having studied so many artists, how would you characterize the particular contribution of Catalan artists to the New York scene? And may from different political points of view?
Well, at that time, and in the Bartoli's time, Jordana?
I guess, yes. If there is, besides Bartoli, that you already explained a lot, if there are other Catalan artists that contribute to this New York scene at the time, at the same time as him?
In the 50s and 60s, I don't know. Later, yes. In the 70s, there is a generation that went to New York for developing new technologies, and it's for working with video and installations. And there is a very good generation there in the 70s, but not in the 50s. In the 50s, no, I don't know. I don't know other names beside him. And when I talk with Dora Ashton, for her was the only Catalan artist there. No, we commented that, and no important. I think he was very, very, very alone. In the 20s, yes. In the 19, and it was Rafael Sala, Torres Garcia. It was another generation in the late 1918, 1919, 20, yes, but not at that time. Not at that time.
Good. And there's a question from Imma from Virginia. She's asking if Josep Bartoli's work can be seen nowadays in the US, maybe New York. Do you know that? Maybe yourself, Pilar, or if George also know?
I think he's not. Digas.
No, in this moment, and the paintings, because there are paintings all around the world, and nobody knows where. A lot of people, not a lot, but some people have pictures of paintings or drawings of my uncle, and we don't know where they are. They are lost. But about 200 or 300 paintings and drawings were belonging to Bernice Bromberg, wife of my uncle. She did a donation to the region Occitanie in the south of France, and now while we are speaking, these paintings are traveling to France, to come back to France, and will be given to the Occitanie region, and will be showed in the memorial of Rives Altes, which is a memorial which is close to Perpignan, a very important place for all the exiles, not only the Spanish and Catalan exiles, but the Arabic exiles, Jewish exiles who were detained in the concentration camp of Rives Altes, in the same place where there was, where they remained with some houses of the camp and some barbed wires of the camp. There is a big memorial, very important, we will show next year until September to 20 September 22. Main, very important exhibition of Bartholdi. We will show not only the paintings who are belonging to Bernice Bromberg, but also which is deposited, which is belonging to the Archival of Barcelona. Archival of Barcelona, we will press 60 original drawings of the concentration camps will be showed for the first time in France. It will be a very important exhibition beginning and in next September, and we hope now. In this moment, we can't have can be sure of nothing, less with the pandemic we are living. But we hope this exhibition will be able to travel after anywhere in the world.
Yeah,
great.
Two things. Jordana reminds me that in New York there was Carles Fontserè, the photographer, but he combined the photography with the taxi driver. but he was a very good photographer, and finally his work is here in Catalonia. And concerning the paintings, when we made this book was an exhibition, and all the paintings that we could find in New York and in Catalonia are reproduced in this book. With Bernice, we went to collectors, private collectors, and to the storages that Bernice had in New York. And I remember to visit this actor that was in the film of Cabaret, this short, he was short, he had a painting, and we photographed, we took a photo of this painting that is reproduced here. What we could find in New York, we reproduce in this book. Maybe there are other possible paintings, I don't know. But in 2002, this was what we could do. And in Mexico, there are many magazines and illustrations, and all is reproduced in this book, what we could find.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So we come to the end of the time we have allocated. So thank you very much, Pilar, Sebastian, George, for all the knowledge you share with us. Definitely was worth. It's amazing. This character. The more we learn and we hear about him, the more it's impressive. What kind of life he had. So thank you very much, of course, also to Catherine and Delphine. Thank you very much for all the audience for taking part in this event, for all of you who make questions. So this event will be posted in YouTube, and you can see it for coming days. So normally a lot of people watch these events later, but we have to find a timetable good for Europe and good, for the US, so we can still enjoy that. But of course, the most important thing here is that you can watch the film, as Delphine and Catherine explained you earlier before. Through this week and next week, and of course the rest of the films of the festival, because I've been told that it's a very interesting festival and there are a lot of good pieces of art. So everyone is recommended to enjoy this opportunity, and to, in times of pandemic, at least we can watch screens, and we can enjoy them. If we can enjoy them from home. So good luck, and if anyone wants to say a final word, we are almost finished here.
Well, thank you, Isid. It was wonderful, very, very interesting. Thank you very much, Sebastian and George and Pilar. It was so interesting to go in depth, and gives you the idea to go a little bit further in Rivesaltes and maybe in Barcelona to see more of these drawings, and to know more about this amazing person.
Sure.
So you're welcome to the festival, indeed.
Perfect.
Delphine?
I forgot to tell you that there is a book, a forget book from the 50s, maybe Sebastian could be interested, is written in English. Anne Bridge is the author, and the title is Frontier Passage. And she describes very good this situation of the Republicans and the exile in the border French, Catalan French border. Well, it's just I forgot to tell you because it's very interesting. And people from France gave me a copy translated into French. It is very, very good. Well, it's something.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. So thanks very much. And definitely this is topics that happened 80 something years ago, but still are breaking news. So hopefully we learn some lessons, and we hope that in the future no one has to be ashamed to explain to your children and grandchildren some stories. Thanks very much.
Muchas gracias.
Okay,
Thank you, Isid.
Gracias.
Xavier.
Bye. Gracias a todos. Gracias. Ya. Finish.